And hello again. Welcome back to Secret Histories. I'm Brian Keene. Today we're going to be talking about Babylon Falling. Our last video was all about the Rising and about the unexpected meteoric success that the Rising experienced in 2003 and 2004. Very, very quickly, I would be contracted to write a sequel to The Rising called City of the Dead. And I would also be contracted by Random House to write a novel called Terminal. But in the meantime, while I was working on those, I still needed money to be coming in. Because The Rising was just one book. And although it was on the bestseller list and it was doing well, those royalty checks came like 4 times a year. Actually, I think in the case of The Rising back then, it was 2 times a year. So I needed money coming in. So I did a series of things. 2 of them were chapbooks, and 1 of them was a short story collection. And we will get into each of those. And tonight we will start with Babylon Falling by Brian Keene. Now, you may notice next to it is Babylon Rising by John Urbancik. And if you look, the covers go together. But these are actually flip books. Very, very cool. Very cool things. These were done by Earthling Publications back in the day when Earthling was just starting out. Great small press. If you've never purchased anything from Earthling, I encourage you to look them up online. They do just some gorgeous books and some great books. But yeah, John and I each did a short story centered around Babylon, and both of them were centered in Iraq. With my story, there are all kinds of legends and myths about the Garden of Eden. But the most common places it, if there was such a real thing, places it in Iraq, somewhere in Iraq, or what would become Iraq. So at the time, the Iraq War was, of course, in full swing. And thanks to the success of The Rising and No Rest for the Wicked and 4x4, I was getting letters from men and women who were serving in Iraq. And indeed, I had a couple friends who I had served with back in the 80s who were still in, they'd gone full-time military, and they were in Iraq as well. So I was hearing a lot from folks over there, and we weren't really seeing them represented in horror fiction or in film. Everything was still World War II and Vietnam and, all these other wars rather than the war that was happening right then and there. So I knew I wanted to set my story in the now. I knew I wanted to set it in Iraq. And the Labyrinth mythos was really starting to click in my head at that point. I had introduced, with The Rising, I had introduced Ob and the Sikwasim, and of course Ob's brothers. With a short story called Earthworm Gods, I had introduced Behemoth. I had introduced Meeble in a short story, and Perturabo in a short story. And next up was Kandara. And this is Kandara's first appearance. It's also the first appearance of Donald Bloom, who, of course, becomes a member of the Seven later on in the Labyrinth series. Bloom is, in fact, based on my best friend that I served with, Dan Blumenthal. Shout out to you, Danny. Dan and I served together in the 80s. He lives outside of Philly now. He owns an extermination company, and I, of course, live here in central Pennsylvania, and we get together quite often. But yeah, I based Bloom on Dan, and every time we get together, I hear about how I owe him royalties, and he wants to play himself when they make the Labyrinth series into a TV show. But yeah, that's where this came from. John's story, also set in Iraq, but in the distant past. And yet the 2 stories do connect together, as do, as I said, the chapbooks. Really neat job from Earthling. They also did this beautiful hardcover edition I'm not going to wrestle with it too much because I'm filming with one hand. It came in this beautiful little tray case. So that was the first thing I did to keep some money coming in while I worked on City of the Dead and Terminal. The other two things were another chapbook called The Rising Necrophobia, which we will get into next time, and then a short story collection called Fear of Gravity. And then after that, Terminal and City of the Dead came out, and we were off to the fucking races at that point. Everything changed forever. More on that later. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace.